Okay, fantastic. I will ring the bell.
Whoa.
Oh, hopefully you heard that. Okay, welcome everybody. Be a good idea just to go through some of the protocol for the meeting. My name's Glenn Stafford. I'm your MC for today's Rotary Sydney meeting. Because we're broadcasting from various locations, you may have some difficulties. If you do join the meeting, you'll be able to view a recording that will be loaded onto our club website, hopefully in the next few days. Now, may I ask all of you to donate to one or more of our worthy projects? Details of how to do that, how to donate, can be found on our website. Simply follow the donate menu button, and it'll take you to our donations page, and you'll see the various projects that we are involved in around the region and in Africa. Now, your donations are welcome. They are critical to the outcomes of these projects. And this is, of course, our centenary year, and our centenary project, Give Every Child a Future, urgently needs your support and your donations. So we aim to vaccinate 100,000 people across 9 Pacific Island countries, people, children specifically, against 3 diseases. And we're running this in partnership with UNICEF. Now, you may have heard Jeffrey Wilbo on many occasions remind us that $45, I hope I got the numbers right here, Jeffrey, will vaccinate a child for life. $450 will vaccinate 10 children. So please follow the link and make your donation on our website. Now, please be aware that we will be muting all microphones during the talk today. And today's guest speaker is Robert Örell, and Rotarian Charlie Allen will provide some background on today's talk before introducing Robert. Questions and comments may be submitted via the chat function, and I will moderate the question and answer session and put those to our guests. Please note that all chat comments are viewable by the hosts of this meeting. Now, before I hand you over to our club president, I'd just like to make a mention of our guests today. We have quite a number, so I'll just give you a few who are notable Rotarians. We have the Rabbi Zalman Kestel, AM, joining us. Emma Cork from the Rotary Club of Perth, welcome. And Mario Nazard, hope I'm pronouncing these right, from the Rotary Club of Bada in Lebanon, and Mario is the president of that club. So welcome to you, and welcome to all of our other guests today. And I will now hand you over to our club president, Fatima Ali, for the welcome to country and the president's address. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land on which we normally meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respect to their ancestors and elders past, present, and future. Fellow Rotarians, guests, and friends, I welcome you to this evening to our Rotary Club of Sydney meeting. It is a pleasure to have you joining us. Today, we are very fortunate to have Robert Örell, who is connecting with us from Sweden, to speak on learning about hate and returning to community. Welcome, Robert. Later, we will do a formal and proper introduction. For now, let me say this quote. Hatred is the only stable emotion that binds together a multitude of human beings and turns them into an obedient collective. This quote is attributed to Adolf Hitler, and sadly, we all know so well the disastrous consequences of his hatred. The distinctive and disturbing feature of racial hatred is that when we hate racially, we do not hate as isolated individuals. Rather, we hate as a part of a group. Equally, the object of hate is not an isolated individual, but a signifier of all members of his or her community. When hate flows from the individual to the group and back again, it takes on a destructive life of its own. Racism is powerful in its capacity to generate fears of the other, a phenomenon that it is widely understood as being a powerful tool for government by which to shape public discourse and behaviors. While fear is a powerful force in itself, it has become an even more significant force in the last few decades with the wide reach of the media and its sophisticated ability to spread messages quickly and effectively through the use of technology. Research has shown that when public figures in the media endorse negative stereotypes, they legitimize prejudicial attitudes. They can also influence the translation of such attitudes into racial hatred, discriminatory, and violent actions. How to turn this hatred around and bring back violent extremists is the subject of today's talk. On this note, I hand you over to Charlie Allen, our club vice president, who will say a few words and then introduce our guest speaker. Thank you, Charlie. Over to you.
Thank you, President Fatima. So an interesting title tonight, Learning About Hate Returning to Community, a curious title, I would suggest, but a title that will certainly become very evident when you hear Robert tell his story. Clearly it's a title that's piqued your interest because you're here, otherwise I guess you'd be watching the news and drinking a glass of red wine, I don't know. But tonight we're very fortunate to be joined by Robert Örell. Robert is a consultant, he's an advisor and advocate on PVE and CVE, preventing violent extremism and countering violent extremism, but most importantly, a consultant and advisor on exiting extremist ideologies. So Robert is really well placed to do this work because he has the lived experience of exiting an extreme ideology. I had the great pleasure to meet and to work with Robert earlier this year. And after that meeting, we've come together and worked together over the space of this year. Robert was invited here early in 2020 by Victoria University, and during his whirlwind couple of weeks here, Robert was used advising Australian police agencies, academics, a wide range of practitioners on PVE and CVE, or preventing violent extremism. So before I hand to Robert, I just want to set the context, the global context of the issue of terrorism. So when you look at the impact of terrorism, last year we experienced 16,000 terrorist-related deaths. That's a very high number. But having said that, what we've seen since 2014, when terrorist deaths was at its peak, was a 50% reduction. So back in over 50% actually, back in 2014, the peak of terrorist deaths was 33,000 deaths, and that number has reduced to 16,000 last year. This significant decline is a result of the reduction in ISIS or ISIL's activity, particularly in Iraq and Syria. It's a very, very different picture when you look at far-right inspired terrorist incidents. So remembering there's been a 50% reduction over the last 5 years in terror-related events overall. Over the last 5 years, right-wing motivated terror has increased by some 320%. Albeit the numbers are far less, but the trend is significant. And I'm sure all of you here still have it fresh in your mind that anti-Islam right-wing terror attack that resulted in 49 deaths in Christchurch. A terror attack that was committed by an Australian, I should add. It's still vividly in all our memories, I'm sure. It's really interesting when you look over the last 5 years plus, the rise in this country in ultra right-wing movements. We've had a proliferation, names like the True Blue Crew, Patriots Defence League, Aussie Pride, No Islam, Nationalist Uprising, the Soldiers of Odin, Stop the Mosque. Now, I don't suggest that these groups shouldn't form. We're all able to form groups and express our views. It's certainly one of the cornerstones of our democratic society. But what we've seen is a shifting in attitudes. And this shifting attitudes is a decline in attitudes globally. And what we've seen trending with that decline in attitudes is this rise in ultranationalist viewpoints, a rise in right-wing inspired populist politics, and also increase in prejudice-motivated crimes, or hate crimes as they're often called, and hate speech. So now to Robert. Robert, as I said, he's worked for the past 2 decades in supporting and advising on exiting extreme ideologies, whether that's right-wing extremism, far-right extremism, organised crime groups, and outlaw motorcycle groups. He understands this journey well because, as I said, he has the lived experience. I'd like to hand you to Robert Örell. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and well, pleasure to be here. Thanks, Charlie, for setting this up, and Fatima for inviting me. Unfortunately, I'm not in Australia. I would love to, but it will be at another point. I'm in Stockholm, Sweden. So just to in a sense, bridge to Charlie's introduction. So my work has primarily been with helping people who are motivated to leave violent right-wing extremism, and to help them in the process of changing and leaving that type of environment, which is usually difficult in many aspects, both from the personal experiences that these individuals have lived through, so to help them to overcome different type of traumas or challenges, but also to reconnect with society. Because most communities, most society are not waiting with open arms to embrace people who leave different type of destructive groups, be it cults or gangs or violent extremism or other similar groups. So there's really a challenge of also reconnecting with societies and with different communities. And this is a large part of exit work. So just 2 sentences on that. Exit work is about a 2-decade experience of really understanding what is it that makes people join these groups. How are people formed in these environments? And from that perspective, how can we help to motivate people to change, but also help with the practical aspects of actually creating change and facilitating this in a sense. And as Charlie said, my background is that I also had experience of being involved in these environments. I since left, and now for 20 years, both worked with helping others, but also studied social pedagogy, psychotherapy, and terrorism studies. But when I was younger and I got involved in these environments, I think there was a few different circumstances or setting that really affected this choice. It wasn't so that I woke up one day and felt I'm going to join the Nazi movement. That makes sense and that's going to be fun. But it's rather over a range of years, there was different experiences that affected me. I think one of the more fundamental experiences was school. I grew up in inner city Stockholm, and I went to a inner city school, and I really enjoyed the first couple of years and had good experiences. There was lots of good social relations, but there was difficulties from So in Sweden, fourth grade would be around 10 years. So around that age, I started to have difficulties in school. And I mean, at that age, I'm not sure I even identified it. It's more that I can kind of look at it from the past and kind of analyze this. And there was a few incidents that I think really unfortunate affected the process. One was a fifth grade, where we both changed school. So the school I was going in was going to be renovated, and we were shifting to another school, which meant that a few hundred students were going to be sharing facility with another few hundred students who didn't know each other. And as many of you know and have experienced, that when groups come together, there might be kind of tensions or even conflicts, or whose turf is this and whose school is this for real. So I think in a sense quite innocent, but still it was there. And my experience was that it really escalated in many ways. I got in conflict with more groups in the new school, which was really my first experiences of conflict. And I mean, as you know, Swedes are usually very kind of good at communicating and mediating and not really conflict oriented in our culture. So for me, this was also new experiences of conflict. And what also happened is that I had to redo fifth grade because of failing studies, and that really affected me very strongly. So the shame and the feeling of not being good enough, but have to redo a year. And for me, this affected me so much that I decided to shift school. I didn't want to go in the same school. I didn't want to come back and do fifth grade again. And my comrades were in sixth grade and I wasn't there. It was too hard of a hit emotionally. So I decided to shift and start a new school. The problem was that redoing a year didn't really help in a sense in academic achievements. I mean, I was still not really. I mean, I had difficulties with learning or with focusing, with attention, and with kind of keeping up. So I think a few weeks into the new semester, I just felt that this is not really, it's not helpful. This is not really where I wanted to do. And I started to drop out quite a lot from class and kind of showing deviant behaviors in different ways. So here, I think I really see a shift where I started to look for another way of building identity than my ordinary friends. I was a bit taller and bigger than them. I had redone a year, so I was a bit kind of odd, and I didn't feel very good emotionally. I mean, it was shameful. So I really started to look for different ways of expressing myself and taking kind of space and building identity. And at first, I had two elderly siblings who listened to death metal type of music. So I also started to listen to that music and started to wear kind of dark clothes, and I painted the upside down crosses on my jacket, and I had all this type of symbols of darkness and evil and such. And I think that really made me stood out, because at that age, none of the others had really a specific style. So I kind of I stood out quite a lot. And school-wise, it just didn't really help in 7th to 9th grade. The school made a lot of interventions. They actually made me go up 1 year because they thought that would motivate me to at least be in school if I were with my the same age group as myself. But the problem is that if you're not really good in school and then you miss 1 year of school, it's just not going to go better. So it was fun for a week or two, and I felt I was back in my group. But I mean, eventually it just simply didn't really help. And they made an intervention where I went to school 2 days a week, and I went to work in a cafe 3 days a week, which was one of the best experience I had of school. It was just to do something else than being in class and kind of reading and not really kind of focusing. And then late ninth grade, so in Sweden, the obligatory school is first to ninth grade. So late ninth grade, before we shift to gymnasium, my parents are of course desperate. They've seen the developments over the last years. They try to help in different ways. So they send me to a special teacher who realizes that what I need is glasses. So after 9 years of failure, of redoing class, of shifting school, of all these interventions, what I needed was glasses to be able to read properly. And to get this in ninth grade was very mixed. I mean, in one way, it was a bit of an explanation that this is, you know, I'm not an idiot, I'm not stupid. It's just that I couldn't really read because I couldn't really see. But it was also a frustration. 9 years of failures and a bad self-esteem of kind of being put down. It also led to a lot of frustration. So at this point, I think around the same time, 8th, 9th grade, I met some elderly friends who were into football, and I joined them to watch football. So I'm not really interested in watching sports, but I joined because of the supporter culture. So in Europe, there's a very strong kind of supporter culture where you would follow your team, and it's usually affiliated with drinking and kind of being a macho, tough guy, and perhaps a bit fighting or kind of these type of you know, attitudes or subcultures. So as a young 14, 15-year-old, not super self-confident, it was quite good to be in these settings where I felt that I was cool. I was one of the gang. I was somebody to count with, and I was fairly angry because of you know, the circumstances. I think one of the lessons from looking at violent extremists and helping clients is really the role of emotions, and how we humans are really good at transforming emotions which are difficulty into something that's more easy to manage. So if we feel fear or shame, this is difficult emotions, it's easier to transform them into something that you can kind of act on, and you can turn on others, and you can externalize your negative emotions to anger or frustration. So I think for me, this is really what happened. I took all of this bad emotions and bad experiences I had, and I externalized it, and I turned it into rage. And the football culture was I mean, that really builds on the very strong us and them, at least in some of the football communities. It's also kind of focused on violence or hatred towards others. So this really, I think it really fitted me, or where I was in that point. I really felt so much at home, and it was such a good community. And you know, over one game, I became a fanatical football supporter, and I didn't miss one game the whole season because I went to every one of them. But there, I also got in touch with another subculture, which I think made even more had even a stronger impact on myself, and this was the neo-Nazi environment, where I think the difference was really the message that you're not just good enough, but you're superior. So coming with my background, with my broken emotional self-esteem, to meet this environment that says, it's not your fault, you're not a failure, you're actually better than others. I mean, this was like a emotional tsunami. It was impossible to resist. I just went into it fully, and just embraced all of it as building my new self. This is who I actually was. I wasn't a failure. I wasn't somebody who was bad or a loser or failure. I actually was somebody in control. So I went in very uncritically. very emotionally driven to this environment. And with my new glasses, I could read better. And I'm sorry to say I didn't redo the 7th or 9th grades Swedish class or history, but what I went into was Nazi propaganda. So I really read everything that I could get my hands on in terms of magazines or pamphlets or books or such, and really got very into this type of environment or ideology. Um, and I think it really resonated with the emotional and social status I was in, but also it built an identity. It was very clear who I was, where I started, where I stopped, kind of where my who am I in a sense. A very strong sense of comradeship. We weren't just a group of friends who were interested in meeting once a week and collecting stamps or something like this, but this was a brothership. This was a brothership of people who I was prepared to die for, and my perception were that they were also prepared to die for me. So a very strong and very intense kind of community. So there was a few years which was filled with conflict and quite a lot of troubles on town. There was demonstrations and riots and concerts and encounters with the police and all kinds of things. But what also happened was that as I had my glasses and I read ideology, after a few years, I also started to realize that what we're kind of how we're living doesn't really resonate with the ideology that we are promoting, because National Socialist doesn't promote that young people should be alcoholics and go into fights on town. They promote superiorness, elitism, and purity in body and mind. So I was very devoted and motivated to try to live these ideas and try to kind of be living this elite lifestyle. So for myself, I stopped drinking. I started working out. I spent more time kind of reading instead of being on town, being in conflicts. And something happened there which was quite interesting, and that was that I started to feel a bit of distance to my friends, and this is friends over 4 or 5 years, very intense, all kinds of experiences, but I started to feel a bit of distance because they didn't want to stop drinking on Friday or Saturday or Wednesday evenings, and they didn't really want to start working out 5 days a week and eating healthy and talking about all these nerdy things that I was getting myself into. They wanted to kind of live the thug life and drink and fight. And I mean, that's really what they were into. So what happened here is that it was quite a big discrepancy that I had to kind of cope with or manage or kind of get myself around. Which really led to this sense of not primarily distancing from ideology, but from the movement. So very slowly I started to feel that these guys are not really elite. They won't really be able to live up to the standards and ideas we have. And during that time, I went into the military service. In Sweden at that point, it was something that I had kind of longed for or prepared for many years, because doing military service meant being trained as a soldier, and our ideas was that we were preparing for a coming revolution. So military training was kind of high on the agenda to achieve for everybody in the group, and for me, I was very motivated to do the military service. But I also realized that the Swedish military, the Swedish army are not, I mean, they don't really want to train Nazis to be good at handling weapons. So I realized that I perhaps I have to have a bit of a low profile. Perhaps I should kind of not be on the, arrested or being in different troublesome situations for a while. So I kept a bit of a low profile. And then once I entered the military, it was a bit of a confusing time because I wasn't sure that I was shifting my ideas, but I was distancing from the group because of ideology. On the other hand, I went into military to become a good soldier, to be able to prepare for the revolution. So it was a lot of kind of conflicting parallel processes that I was managing at that point. But what really happened, I think, was because if we look at it, one of the reasons that I started to look for an alternative identity was a failed sense of competency. So lack of self-esteem. And what happened in the military is that I was a good soldier, and I was really motivated, and I learned a lot, which meant that I gained competence, the sense of competence and the self-esteem, which was really interesting because I think just a few months into the military, I realized that whatever I will do after I'm done here, I'm not sure I really want to go back to the movement. I'm not sure they really have anything more to offer me, or that I want to continue with this group, which was really the identification with the group. And once that was in process, the ideological components were difficult to uphold. Once you're out of the group, it's difficult to, or at least it was for me, it was difficult to uphold the ideas because they didn't really matter once you were out of the group and you didn't really talk with people, or you kind of got out of that social environment. So for me, it was really interesting that it started to shift very strong. And looking at the components, it's really leaving the group physically. So I didn't have a lot of contact when I was in the military because I wanted to have a low profile. The sense of getting into a new setting where you meet new people, and gaining the sense of competence and self-esteem, and how that really helped to build something new and to kind of shift perspectives. And during my year in the military, I also got in touch with a group called Exit. And at that point, I had never heard of them before. It was one of my friends who I started to open up about this doubt, which is difficult to do in the movement. It's difficult to talk about the doubt with other people who are active. But I brought it up with him, and he linked me with Exit. And I think that really made a very strong shift, just to talk with somebody who had similar experiences, who didn't judge, because I was very conscious that most people don't really like Nazis. I mean, nobody except the Nazis like Nazis. So I was very aware that, in a sense, I don't really have a community to go to. I can't really talk about this with people in general. So it was, I think, for me, a very big help to talk with somebody who had similar experiences, and who kind of met me in a non-judging, empowering way, and helped me to really take the step and leave. And this was really the story. And during the year of military, I could also start working a lot with my ideas, and then being in touch with Exit really helped to put my story together for myself, to understand what was the different elements that led me into this movement. How was it to be active, and what was it that actually led to the process of change? And that really helped me to also be able to step further and to leave. And as Charlie said, now for the last roughly 20 years, I've been working in this field, helping others to leave in Sweden and Europe and the US. So that's the short story. Thanks for listening.
Okay, I just coming off mute. So thank you very much for that. We're open for questions. So anybody has any questions, please go on to chat, and I can put them to Robert. And whilst I'm waiting for the first ones to come through, Robert, you might be able to detect from my accent. I'm from the UK originally, and I think I mentioned earlier that I left the UK probably in the middle of the race riots that were happening, particularly against the Indian and Pakistani communities there at the time, both in London and up north. And a lot of that was being created by agitation from the National Front, a far-right organization, and other extremist groups who were infiltrating skinhead gangs and paying them money to go and create trouble. I was very lucky. I was involved in a few of those riots, or rather I was almost a victim of some of those. I wasn't participating per se. And it's very scary. At what point do you think you changed direction from potentially becoming one of those thugs that you mentioned? You went down a different path. But how close were you to perhaps going down that path and then that becoming that much more, I guess, violent towards discriminated minorities?
I mean, I think once you're in this type of mindset and groups, these ideologies, it's really promoted. I mean, it's very clearly promoted that you have the right, you are superior, so you have the right to use violence to defend yourself. And there's even terminologies in these groups where they would kind of motivate attacks on others by preventative self-defense, because if we don't attack them, they might attack us. So there's all this type of illogic reasons for why you should attack people, and this is embedded in the propaganda, in the music, in the movies. So I think more almost all the people who were in these environments were active in different type of violence. The question might be how to what extent, because also when we were out on town, we were looking for troubles. I mean, and we had, very clearly we had a style of clothes, black military clothes with different type of Nazi slogan or patches. I mean, people knew where we were from, so that automatically led to lots of troubles and fightings and these things. But I think it might be to a level of, I think both strategy, but also emotional coping. So how do you cope with your own emotions? Because if you have a lot of frustration and rage and you don't know how to manage it, it's easier to put it out in violence than to actually work through it yourself. I'm not sure that really answered, but some type of thoughts at least on this.
No, it can be very easy to be dragged in. So one of the questions that's come in, and I think you briefly touched on your parents there, but what role did your parents play on this journey you've been on?
Mm-hmm. So they were very supportive during school, and they really, they put me on what's it called, like an extra teacher evenings, and we had endless meetings with schools, and I mean they were there in many ways. But they also saw the shift. So when I was 12 and I went into the black metal, death metal type of style with dark clothes, and then when I was 14 and I went into the kind of football supporter, and from there into the neo-Nazism. So I mean they saw the different phases I went through very clearly, and tried to intervene in different ways. But I think the problem was that once I started, I just wasn't really open or available for input. I think this is one of the challenges we see when we also work with family support, which is a big part of exit work. So helping families is to understand what's happening, to be able to cope with the situation, and then going into non-confrontational approaches in how do we create change in people? How do we actually what is it that leads people to change perspective? And usually, and I think we can go to ourselves, usually it's not conflict. If somebody comes up to you in town and tells you that you're a bad person and you look weird or you should change, that doesn't really lead us to change usually. But what leads to change is usually close relationships where people that we have built trust and confidence with give us input, or even better, they empower us and they build us up, and that leads more easier to change. So I think in that sense, it's really linked to how do we understand the involvement in these groups, and how do we respond to people in these groups. My parents, I mean, at that point, there was no exit work, there was no resources to read online, there wasn't the internet. I mean, in a sense that they were more, they were less had less possibility to gain this type of insights, but I mean, they really did their best in many ways. But once again, once I was in the movement, it just wasn't really possible to affect me with saying that this is wrong, or forbid it or so.
Yeah, that last question was from Kathy, by the way, Kathy Tate, so thank you for that. Mark Dyer is asking a question. You mentioned your path away from the Nazi group, but your road to the group, was that similar to others in the group?
Good question. I think, my specific story is probably unique in a sense, but if we think of experiences that leads people into these environments, we usually don't find people who are, have good academic achievements, who have stable kind of family homes, who never been victim of bullying or crimes, who have strong social networks, who's a popular partner. I mean, we usually don't see that type of individuals for some reason just joining a gang or IS or a Nazi group or a cult, but usually there will be risk factors that affects or in a sense open up that there's a need to join these groups. And then in combination, really strongly, the combination with getting access to these environments. I mean, I think that's really it, to have an openness, a vulnerability, and then access, and that usually happens through personal relations. These groups are very good at building confidential reports with people, either in person or online, and they know how, in a sense, to play on fear and belonging and empower people that you're not a victim, you're not alone, you are with us, and together we're strong. So I think there's more similarities, yeah.
Thank you for that. Hope you can hear me still. My earphones just gave up the ghost, battery's flat. A question from James Allen. What would your advice be to governments as to how they should counter these kind of groups, and how do you bring the people back in from the cold?
Yeah, well, that's actually part of my work, to be policy advising, and usually what we see is that it's complex. It's difficult to answer in a short 1 or 2 minute answer in the webinar, but I think there's more parts to it that comes together. I mean, one is clearly to educate first-line practitioners in how to both identify but also understand and respond to a moment in these groups. And this is not just police or I mean, this is the education sector, it's the law enforcement sector, it's the social work, it's it's a range of different sectors that needs to be equipped with how do we identify, understand and respond to involvement in these environments. But also thinking, what do we know that actually works? I mean, there's a few decades of practices, and from there we can learn some at least best or at least promising practices of what does actually work, and how can we build up operations and responses informed on that. And just one last comment on this is the work I do with the European Commission, where I co-lead work on exit, an exit working group where we gather practitioners within the EU to exchange experiences, best or promising practices or worst practices, just to share, evolve, and to spread how do we work with exit type of work. And then, of course, to formulate policy recommendations from this. How do we see policy shaping from these practical experiences?
Okay. A couple of questions from Jeffrey. I'll put them together. The first part is, how did you transition from the military to civilian life? And did any of your former Nazi friends, in quotes, contact you after leaving the military?
Mhm, mhm. Good questions. And really the first question, the transition, I think for me, it was really through the help of Exit. So once I got in touch with Exit about halftime through my military service, I mean, I felt that that was very valuable for me. And I also realized that I had to rebuild, restart something after military. I wouldn't want to go back to the same kind of friends, or you know, I shared apartment with one of my friends for a while, and I just didn't really see that as an option. And then at the same time leaving, so it was really to connect with something new, which was for me Exit. So connecting with Exit, and thinking of you know, where do I want to live? What do I want to do with my life? Where do I want to work? I was very fortunate to getting an offer to actually work with Exit quite soon after I went out the military. I think that was extremely helpful for myself in my personal journey to also get into this context of how do I use my experience in a constructive way to help others instead of going into something else destructive. I can also see that it was a bit fast. I think it's better if people have more time between they leave and they start working with helping others. But for me, it was really a good kind of fantastic opportunity to grow and to use my experiences constructively.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry. You can say something.
And the second question was the friends, exactly. So how I mean, what happened was that when I left, a bit of my group kind of fell apart. So more people, I'm not sure they left, but they just didn't stay actively involved in different ways. And I actually managed to have one or two of my very close friends to also leave together with me. Which helped in many ways. But of course, I met people who were still active and who knew who I was. I was very active for many years, and I'm a good networker, and I was back then too. So I knew a lot of people also in that movement. So I went on a cruise, and there was a group of friends or former friends I know there, and on town, if I was out, I would kind of see people. But I mean, I think what helped me was that I went into the military for about a year and had a very low profile. So I was kind of out of sight for a long time. And then I didn't announce to people that I'm leaving and I'm working for Exit. So it took probably 1.5 years from that they saw me in the movement till they realized that I'm out and I'm not longer coming back to them. And I think that helped in a way. It would be more difficult to stand up on a meeting and saying, you guys suck, I'm out of here. I mean, that would be more kind of provocative, or how to call it. It would have led to more tensions. So I think in that sense, this kind of smooth transition out, and it wasn't really clear for a long time that I wasn't coming back. I think for me personally, that helped.
Okay, thank you. Question from David Hirsch. How easy was it to dehumanize others, and how can you explain this?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question. I think this is really about the psychology of groups. I mean, dehumanization is not something that's unique to Nazism or violent extremist groups. Dehumanization is something that we all are capable of. A lot of people might think of severe sexual perpetrators as dehumanized, or homeless in many countries are seen as, or many cultures are seen as almost dehumanized, people who can't even take care of themselves. So I think first of all, we have to really acknowledge that we all have the capability of dehumanizing others. The problem is that in groups that promote dehumanization, it becomes even stronger. And if you have an ideology that promotes that you are superior and your enemies are dehumanized, it becomes even kind of easier in that sense. I think for me, once again, it was really affiliated to the very negative emotions. I mean, I could shift from being a loser to being superior by shifting my mindset into this ideology, and then it was fairly easy to point on others and say that they're not, they're not good enough. And really the strong emotions of frustration and hatred really help that process in many ways to dehumanize. But what was interesting is also that once I left the group and the kind of the social spheres, it was fairly quickly that I could also leave that type of mindset. And I think one thing that really helped was also to meet people who I perceived as enemies or dehumanized. Once I actually met them in a new setting and with new fresh eyes, it became very clear to me that perhaps it wasn't really kind of the wrong track, or I could fairly quickly see that my previous kind of ideas just didn't really hold up very strong.
I've got quite a few questions here still, but we're starting to get short on time, just a few minutes left. So maybe I'll try and squeeze one more in. Fatima, did you have a question you wanted to put to Robert?
Second. Yes, thank you, Glenn. I'm interested, your journey sounds very similar to Islamic fundamentalism as well. Not Islamic fundamentalists, more Islamic extremists, those who go into violent extremist activities. So similar from the literature I have read on how they become, there are similarities about lack of self-esteem, issues to do with education, family, and so on and so on. There are other factors as well. The nature of Islam sometimes can help sometimes. I'm interested, do you see similarities as well? And do you see as well similar strategies in de-radicalization can apply to those groups, or are there differences?
Very good question and good observation. I totally agree with you that there's a lot of similarities between a range of different groups. If we look at for example, just to point out some perspectives, so these groups usually have a very black and white perspective of what's right and wrong, and they're always right. So this idea of we have we own the truth, and everything else we invalidate as fake news or whatever we call it. The role of distance and isolation, that you distance yourself towards others. You wouldn't have kind of Nazis going out and trying to be friends with non-Nazis because they're actually enemies, so you don't really want to be in touch with them, or kind of. And then the role of dehumanization, that you take away the human values of your enemies to be able to commit violence towards them. I think there's very strong similarities between a range of different groups here, and really the process of why people join. That it's very seldom that people pick up an ideological book and read and say, oh, this kind of explains my world. But it's much more often the social process of getting to know people, getting into different kind of communities, getting explanations of the world, and perhaps especially getting explanation of why this happened to you. Why did all of these things that you in your lived through kind of experiences, why did this happen to you? Well, because, and then a lot of explanations, usually conspiracy theories, that emotionally helps to put you together in a sense. You become put together and you understand, wow, this is why this happened to me. This is really, I got robbed by immigrants in Sweden because there's a plan to take over Sweden, and they want to suppress Swedes. And I mean, how it sounds totally crazy for us outside, but once you're there in that vulnerable emotional state, it becomes an explanation that you can at least come to terms with, that this explains why I'm here and what's happening. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. At this point, we finish the questions and answers there. I'd like to hand over to Kathy Tate for the vote of thanks.
Robert, so compelling. And I would like to share a couple of your quotes with the audience, which I found quite impactful. One of them was, the more I could connect with my own humanity, the more I could recognize the humanity in other people. And then when you talk about what gives life to the far right movement, what does work? The two things this far right movement craves is conflict and attention. And you say, so starve them of conflict and attention. Robert, this was beyond enlightening. And I took a few notes, but very briefly, in summation, timing is everything. And when we see you move from shame to that of being or feeling more superior, and the power of your glasses and the difference those glasses made to inform your new pathway was enlightening. The military service and the courage it took to actually separate yourself from the group and to examine and provide that self-examination that enabled you to move to this amazing new life where you are making a tremendous difference to groups around the world. We have a peace building group here in our Rotary Club. We want to thank you for your work and your incredible contribution in making a difference to the youth, people, and families around the world in regards to exiting from this very sad ideology. With that in mind, we'd like to make, on your behalf, a contribution to our centenary project, Give Every Child a Future. We're going to contribute $100, and with that, it helps to vaccinate some of 100,000 Pacific Rim children. And thank you again for your deep courage, sincerity, and we so enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here, and good luck with your important work and community as well.
Thank you, Robert. I reiterate what Kathy has said. On behalf of the club, I think we need to unmute everyone. And I was just going to say, thank you so much for sharing with us your journey and for your contribution to making the world a better world, and which is a theme of Rotary as well. So thank you so much. Everyone, please show your appreciation.
Everybody should be able to unmute themselves now.
Unmute themselves, unmute yourselves. Thank you so much. And Robert, if I can indulge a little bit more, we would like to know, might have a communication with you offline. How can Rotary contribute to youth? You have the youth, the type of youth you have described, to assist them in getting out from these experiences and so on. I don't know what we can do, but would be very happy to have a chat with you offline if you, and I'll get Charlie to communicate with you on that one, if you can indulge us.
Oh, for sure. There's more to say, but it's more than one or two sentences, I think.
I thought so.
One last point on this. I was in touch with a group called All Together Now in Sydney a few years back, who I know works on the prevention of extremism and racism. So that's my last comment here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you so much. And if you wish to stay to remain with us, please do. But if you want to leave the meeting, feel free to go. But thank you again for your
I'll leave you,
presentation.
but thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Okay.
Bye.
And
Bye
Rob. Bye. And now we'll go back to the structure of the procedure for our meeting. I would like to, before we conclude our meeting, I'd like to introduce Adam Mesa, who is the president of the City of Sydney Rotaract Club. Adam just took the role last week. They had the handover, the changeover last week. So Adam, are you online? Still online with us?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Hi, Adam. I just
Hello.
hi, and congratulations on taking the role.
Thank you.
Can I ask you to say a few words about yourself? When did you join Rotaract? And just briefly, a couple of sentences about your, Yourself.
Yeah, sure. I joined Sydney City Rotary back in January 2019. However, I have been in a lot of different kinds of organizations and communities that kind of share the same values to Rotaract and Rotary as well. So it's not something that was completely new to me back in 2019. But yeah, at the moment, I'm still currently studying. I'm doing my master's in data analytics, and I also that take from one moment. So I forgot his name. So what was going to happen here? Sorry, my bad. I didn't have a speech prepared, but
That's okay. Just a few words. What you sent me in your bio will be enough.
yeah, no problem. No, sorry. I was going to say was what Robert said. That was very interesting because I'm also a huge advocate for human rights. So it was also really nice to kind of get some insight, you know, on what it is like to have that ideology on the other side as well.
Okay.
So yeah, it's
Welcome.
lovely to meet you all. Thank you.
Well, I look forward as well. We all look forward to have working together with your Rotaract Club, but also you're always invited. You're always welcome to attend our club meetings, and as well invite your fellow Rotaractors to attend our club meeting. And we look forward to our joint cooperation. So thank you, Adam. Thanks
No
a lot.
problem. Thank you so much.
And now just a reminder, again, before I conclude the meeting about our upcoming events. So as you know, we have our coffee catch up on the 30th of, on this Thursday, the 30th of July at 11:30. Is it 11:30? Yes?
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock, sorry, Tony. I'm getting my times confused, yes. At 11 o'clock. And Tony will send the Zoom link, yes? Tony?
Correct. Yep,
Yeah.
I will.
So really, it's a great idea for all of for whoever can do that time to attend, because you get not only to meet fellow Rotarians from your club, but also from other clubs and chat about any topic you want to chat about, or Tony allows us to chat about. So
Yeah,
that's
30 minutes only.
yeah, 30 minutes. So we can't solve the world problem, but we can chat about different things. Also, don't forget, next week we have our meeting is back to our normal time, which is at 12:30. We'll be focusing on Give Every Child a Future, and we have a speaker, is the president of the AMA of New South Wales, Dr. Danielle McMillan, who will be talking particularly about the significance of vaccination. So please make it to that time. It's really important because we will describe in more details the project, what it means, what are we doing. We have different speakers as well from the project, but also it'd be nice to hear Dr. McMillan as well. So before I conclude, you know, I started the meeting with a quote on hate, and I just want to end it with a quote on anti-hate quote. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, of his background, of his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. And this is this is from Nelson Mandela. And I think the experience of Robert demonstrates so much that no one is born with hate. So thank you so much, all of you, for participating today. It's been a pleasure to have you as always at our meeting, and keep coming to those meetings. So if anyone wishes to stay for a chat after this, please feel free to stay. We'll be here until 7:30. Otherwise, thank you so much, and good evening, everyone who is leaving the meeting. Okay.
Thanks, Fatima. I just want to know where Diana Richards is this week.
Don't know. Is she online?
She was.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you believe it? I'm in Cleveland and Queensland, and I'm about to go across to what's the island across from us? Anyway, Stradbroke Island.
Oh my God.
And you know, walk around some headlands and beaches there. And I'm staying in an Airbnb, and it looks like a Versace hotel, I have to tell you.
Wow.
And I'm about to have my prawns and salad for dinner out on the deck as I look out at this most beautiful.
Stop.
Yeah, stop.
Too much information.
Here in the coloured lights in the pool. So anyway, we're doing okay.
Yeah.